Good morning. I'm Ted Crumley, Chairman of the Board of Hecla Mining Company. I want to welcome all of you. Before we begin the formal part of the meeting, I would like to just cover some points, one of which is, as you entered, you were given a form that you could fill out and ask a question. We'll have a session later on where we'll answer the questions, and we want to gather those up so that we can digest them before we start the meeting. So if you haven't put your question on the form and you have one, please do that. We'll gather those up and then we'll begin the formal meeting, and Mr. Baker will handle those questions a little later on in the session. So if you have forms filled out in the question, Jeannie and Tammy will move through the crowd, and please hand them any questions you have. I guess it's Jeannie that will be moving through the crowd. Okay, thank you. Well, good morning. I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the company, and this morning on behalf of the directors and the management, we want to welcome you to our 2017 annual meeting. At this time, I will call the meeting to order. As the bylaws provide, I will act as chairman of the meeting. Our corporate secretary, Michael White, will act as secretary of the meeting. The company did not receive notice of any shareholder proposals or shareholder nominations. Therefore, no such proposals or nominations will be considered at this meeting. Let me cover the agenda very quickly. Upon entering the meeting this morning, as I said, you were provided a form to ask questions. The rules of the conduct of the meeting is that we will move through the meeting in accordance with the agenda, and we will consider only those items that are properly presented before the company. To conduct the meeting in an orderly manner, we ask all participants adhere to the agenda and abide by the rules of conduct. In the interest of time, each shareholder will be limited to one question during the meeting. Hopefully you put that on your form. If any shareholder desires to ask any other questions of the CEO or other company personnel, they will be available after the meeting, and you can feel free to talk with them. One of the things that, as all of you know that have been involved with Hecla, safety is a core value of this company. And so we begin our meetings with a safety share, which could be about operations, could be about your instances in your private life. We want people not only to work safely, but to live safely. So I can do my small bit this morning. Let me just quickly, obviously out of this room, we have one exit behind you, but once you go through the doors, there are exits to the left, or straight ahead there are exits. And if anything were to happen and you need to exit, I would ask you, don't go to the elevators, go down the stairs to the lobby to exit. So we just want to remind people, hopefully nothing would happen, but be aware of the exits. I would like to take this opportunity to begin the meeting by introducing the current directors not standing for election today who are in attendance, and I will call their names and ask each one to stand. First of all, Cassie Boggs. Cassie was appointed to Hecla's board in January. She is the general counsel at Resource Capital Funds, a mining-focused private equity firm. She served as Senior Vice President, Corporate Development at Barrick Gold Corporation. She is also the past board member and president of the Rocky Mountain Mineral Law Foundation. And Cassie has over 35 years of experience as an attorney, having practiced law in several U.S. and overseas jurisdictions. And we welcome Cassie to the board. George Nethercutt. George has extensive background as a U.S. Congressman, with his focus on natural resource policy, mining legislation, and environmental policies on public lands. He's worked for the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C., focused on oil and gas, natural resources, mining, and commerce. He served as chief of staff to a U.S. senator in Alaska, where he worked on issues involving agriculture, fisheries, timber, and mining. His consulting business consists of representing clients with mining and natural resource issues. George has over 40 years of political experience and has served as a director of Hecla for 12 years. Steve Rybowski. Steve has extensive background as a certified public accountant where he specialized in the mining industry with an emphasis on global mining tax and royalty policy. He is the founder and principal of Wolf Sky Consulting, a tax consulting firm. He was a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers for 27 years until his retirement in 2014. Steve has over 37 years of experience in accounting and has served as a director of Hecla for the past year. Terry Rogers. Terry served as Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Cameco Corporation, Cameco, a uranium producer. He was a former president of Kumtor Operating Company, a gold producer. Terry has 31 years of experience in the mining industry, holds a chartered director designation from the Directors College, and has served as a director of Hecla for the past 10 years. Chuck Stanley. Mr. Stanley is Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of QEP Resources, a natural gas and oil exploration and production company. He is the former Chief Operating Officer and Director of Questar Corporation. He is a geologist, has an extensive background in natural resources. That's a little inside joke with our geologists up here. They're sitting together. He has 33 years of experience in the natural gas industry, and Chuck has served as the director of Hecla for the past 10 years. I'm Ted Crumley. I retired from Office Max Corporation. You might wonder what's that got to do with mining. It's just lots of experience. I served as Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, as well as Senior Vice President. I worked over 30 years in various positions as Senior Vice President, Chief Financial Officer with Boise Cascade Corporation, a paper and forest products company, and I have been on the board of Hecla for 22 years and have served as chairman for the past 11 years. I will introduce the directors that are standing for election in just a moment. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge our outside auditors. Take this opportunity to introduce their representatives of BDO USA. And we have with us this morning Amy Roberts and John Heidemann. Thank you, too, for being with us. At this time, I'm going to ask the Secretary, Michael White, if he will provide information on the record date and the quorum. Michael?
Thank you, Ted, and good morning. The Board of Directors has set the record date. It was set for March 27, 2017 for the shareholders meeting. We have a list of shareholders available here today as of the record date. We also have a list on file at the offices at Hecla Mining Company's headquarters in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and that's been in place there for the last 10 days. I've been advised by the inspectors of election that there have been filed thus far proxies for shareholders to vote at the meeting, who are voting at the meeting, in excess of 317 million shares. That represents approximately 80% of our outstanding shares. Because we have an excess of a majority, we have a quorum present, and the meeting can proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. The inspectors of election for today are Broadridge Financial Solutions, Tammy Whitman, Hecla's Assistant Corporate Secretary, and Jeannie DuPont, Hecla's Corporate Communications Coordinator. The order of business for today, there are 8 matters to be voted upon: the election of 2 directors, ratification of the appointment of BDO as the company's independent registered public accounting firm for 2017, an advisory vote on executive compensation, an advisory vote on the frequency of the vote on executive compensation, approval of the amended and restated Hecla Mining Company stock plan for non-employee directors, approval of an amendment to the company's certification of incorporation to increase the number of authorized shares from 500 million to 750 million, approval of amendments to the company's certificate of incorporation and bylaws to reduce certain 80% supermajority voting provisions to a 2/3 requirement, and finally approval of amendment to the company's certificate of incorporation and bylaws to permit shareholders to call special meetings of shareholders under certain circumstances. There's extensive information on these 8 items in the proxy if you would like to, whenever you would like to refer to those. Those shareholders who did not turn in their proxies or wish to vote in person or wish to change their votes, If this time, if you would raise your hands, if you need a proxy, the ballot will be brought to you. So any shareholders, remember, are entitled to one vote for each share registered in their names. And if you're voting by ballot, please mark your ballots and then hold it up and it'll be collected. Is there anyone who needs or requires a ballot this morning? If not, fine, thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce the two directors standing for election today. Phil Baker. Phil has served as CEO for the past 14 years and president of the company for 16 years. Always behind me. He has served on the board of other publicly held mining and natural resource companies and holds legal and accounting degrees. Phil has over 31 years of experience in the mining industry and has served on Hecla's board for 16 years. George Johnson. George is over here. George has served as Senior Vice President of Operations of B2 Gold Corporation until his retirement in 2015 and has served as a Director of B2 Gold since March of 2016. He is a mining engineer and has held executive positions with other mining companies over the years, including was Vice President of Metal Mining for Hecla until 1999, so we welcome George back. He has 45 years of foreign and domestic experience in underground and open pit mine construction and operations management. He has served as a director of Hecla for the past year. If elected, their terms will expire in 2020 or until respective successors are appointed. Note at this time, no other nominations have been received and therefore the nominations are closed. Since there are no ballots to be presented this morning, the next item I would like to touch on is a director who is retiring. This time I'd like to introduce Dr. Anthony Taylor. To most of you, Tony has served with Hecla for 15 years, has been an outstanding director, and he's a geologist also, obviously. I'll cover that, but that's another issue. Tony currently serves as President, CEO, and Director of Selex Resources. He has served as President, CEO, and Director of other mining companies. He has worked at all levels of exploration from field geology to senior management and has over 52 years of experience in the mining industry. I just want to say that Hecla is very proud and happy to have had 15 years of outstanding service from Dr. Taylor. His contribution to Hecla mining has been significant. He has offered his extensive knowledge of geology with a focus on exploration. One thing I want to touch on for those of you who've known Tony, contrary to the popular opinion that you may have heard in the press, that a former governor of Alaska coined the phrase "drill, baby, drill." You may have heard that. I can attest that Tony Taylor is the original author of the "drill, baby, drill." And other members of Hecla's management I think will back me up on this. I don't believe there was ever a single meeting where Tony did not emphasize the importance of exploration and drilling in this company. Phil and Dean, as I said, can confirm that. So on behalf of the board of directors and the Hecla family, I want to extend our thanks to Tony for his service and his friendship, and we all wish Tony and Marion the best in the future. She's ignoring you, Tony, as usual. At this time, I'm going to ask Michael to report on the votes, if you would. Michael?
Thank you again, Ted. As Ted indicated early on, there are 8 proposals being voted on by shareholders today. I'm going to review those and the voting results for each of those in the order that they were set forth in the proxy statement. The first 5 proposals require a vote of a majority of the shares voting at the meeting, including the election of directors. And I have gotten a report from the inspectors of election in each of these matters, included the votes that were cast here today. For the election of the 2 directors, a majority of votes cast at the meeting have been voted for each of the 2 directors. That's Mr. Baker and Mr. Johnson. Therefore, in each case, they have been elected for a 3-year term. As to Proposition 2, 98% of the shares present and voting at the meeting have been voted in favor of BDO USA LLP and the appointment of BDO as the company's independent registered public accounting firm has therefore been ratified. Proposal number 3, approximately 96% of the shares present and voting at the meeting have been voted in favor of the company's executive compensation plan. This is an advisory vote, so therefore the advisory vote on executive compensation has been approved. Proposal number 4, approximately 73% of the shares present and voting at the meeting have been voted in favor of an annual vote on advisory for executive compensation. Therefore, it will be a one-year submittal to shareholders on an advisory basis, and that has been approved. Proposal number 5, approximately 92% of the shares present and voting at the meeting have been voted in favor of the amended and restated Hecla Mining Company stock plan for directors, and therefore the plan has been approved. Proposal number 6 requires a vote of a majority of the outstanding shares. This is the increase in the authorized shares. So 70% of the shares outstanding have voted in favor of the amendment to Hecla's Certificate of Incorporation, increasing the number of authorized shares from 500 million to 750 million, and therefore the amendment also has been approved. The last two proposals, propositions or proposals 7 and 8, require a vote, a supermajority vote to change those. So 80% of the outstanding shares must vote in favor to amend those provisions. One requires proposes to reduce the supermajority vote for certain provisions in our bylaws and certificate of incorporation. It received a 54% vote. Since it requires an 80% vote to make that amendment, it has failed. The last proposal received a 55% of the outstanding vote, and it has also failed. And it was the amendment to allow shareholders to call a special meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We will now hear a presentation from the company's president and CEO, Mr. Baker. As a reminder, questions will be answered at the end of Mr. Baker's presentation. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Phil.
Thanks a lot. It's good to be here, and I appreciate your attendance here at our annual meeting. This, I guess, is the second occasion that we've done our annual meeting in Vancouver. And we have done that here for a couple of reasons, not the least of which we've had our co-headquarters located here since 2007. And Vancouver is a very important place for the mining industry. This is a mining center. This is a place where lots of exploration activity is sort of originated. You know, the thought and the leaders in the exploration world, lots of them are here. And you think about the major mining companies in Canada, interestingly enough, two of the major ones are right here in Vancouver, and probably there's more that I'm not thinking of. So we're happy to be here, and we're happy to have our annual meeting here because it gives us an opportunity to communicate with the mining community here in Vancouver. And this is going to be a little different annual meeting than maybe some of them that you've attended because, as I was telling Amy, our auditor with BDO, I'm not going to talk any about financials or so if you're here, you know, hoping that I'm going to run through a set of financial statements and take you all the way through that income statement, all the way to net income, I'm not going to do that today, and I'm sure you're very disappointed about that. But instead, I'm going to talk about things that we're doing to try to innovate our mines, to try to bring new technology in our mines to improve safety and productivity in the mines. But before I do that, I'm just remiss in not adding, if I don't add my congratulations and thanks to you, Tony, for your service to Hecla Mining Company. It has been You've been truly a great contributor to the board, to the company. So thanks so much for all that you've done for Hecla. Dave Shanko would be very upset if I didn't put this slide up that says that I'm going to make forward-looking statements, and if I do that, it's subject to the conditions found in our 10K and 10Q. So where's Dave Shanko? I forget, am I supposed to introduce the officers now or later?
Anytime that you would like.
Why don't I do that now since Dave, so Dave, stand up. Dave's our general counsel. It's been with Hecla, I guess 7 years now. Thanks, Dave. Rob Brown is our VP of Corporate Development. I want you to know this is the first occasion I can think of in Vancouver that he hasn't had a tie on, and it's at our annual meeting, and with everybody else with a tie. Rob has worked with Hecla for the past 2 years, basically, both as a consultant and as an employee. George Sturgis. George Sturgis is our Vice President of Project Development and really was the author behind the development of the foreshaft at the Lucky Friday and sort of all of our projects of that sort. Carlos is our Vice President of San Sebastian in Mexico. If I was going to talk about the income statement, San Sebastian would have a very prominent role there with the value that it has generated over the last year, and we're seeing more of that this year. Elaine is our Vice President. You notice I don't say the last names because I always mispronounce them. So Elaine is our Vice President at Casa Berardi. Elaine, you've been with Hecla for what, about 3 years? Carlos actually has been with Hecla since 94, I think, 96. Carlos is a Mexican national. Worked at our operation in Venezuela for 8 years. Worked at the Lucky Friday for 8 years in the mill, and is now the GM. So I just mentioned that because I think it shows the talent that we have in Hecla and the international scope that we have. Larry Radford. Larry is our Vice President of Operations, Senior Vice President of Operations, and has been with Hecla for more than 5 years now, and we've had great success at continually improving our operations during that time, and Larry's been the real driver behind that, and lots of what I'm going to talk about was probably better if he was talking about it, because he is the real expert among the senior management team, and so grab him after the meeting and you can get the real straight scoop on this stuff. Dean McDonnell, our Senior Vice President of Exploration. Dean has been with us since 2007 and has really been the architect behind the growth that we've had in our reserves and resources. Over the last 10 years, in the time he's been here, it's grown 300 million ounces of silver that we've discovered in that time. We have roughly the most silver reserves in our history today as a result of that success. Lindsay Hall, our Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. Lindsay has only been with Hecla roughly a year, and we're so glad to have him on board as we navigate the changing world that we're in with interest rates seems to be rising and prices are very volatile, and so we're glad to have him on board. Keith is our Vice President of Greens Creek operation. Keith's been with us, about 3 years? Yeah, so 3 years. He's been in this role really since roughly the beginning of the year. Prior to that, he was the manager of the mine at Greens Creek. Okay, and who am I forgetting? Where? Luke. There he is, way in Mark Board. So there's Luke Russell. Luke is our Vice President of External Affairs, and he sort of deals with all the government entities. He deals with environmental matters. He's the guy that's responsible for advancing our permitting, and particularly permitting on our projects that we have in Montana. And Luke's been with Hecla about 4 years, yeah. And then Mark Board. Lots of you know Mark, our Vice President of Technical Services. And so in addition to Larry, Mark would be another person to grab to learn more about all the technologies that we have. So have I forgotten? Claire. There's Claire Alexander. Claire is our Vice President of the Lucky Friday. Claire has been there 3 years now, and it's been so good to have Claire as part of the team taking over as the GM of that operation. And then, of course, Mike Westerlin, right there in the back. Mike is our Vice President of Investor Relations. So everything that you see that's gone on here, he's been the primary driver behind this meeting and having it here in Vancouver. Anybody else? Where's Carolyn? Carolyn Turner, our treasurer. And Carolyn has been with Hecla about 8 years now, and is working with Lindsay on, like one of the things we do is we hedge our base metals to try to manage our cash flows, and she runs that program. And then Dan Nelson, our controller. Dan's been with Hecla and in Greens Creek for 35, 32? 27, God. Yeah. All I can tell you is that there isn't anybody that knows the statements better than Dan does, and particularly the statements of Greens Creek better than Dan. So, anybody else? All right. Oh, yeah, Mike Clary. Where's Mike Clary? Mike is our interim HR director. Mike has been with Hecla as an accountant, as a lawyer, and now as the HR director for how many years, Mike? 23 years, and he is the quintessential jack of all trades, and master of many. So okay. So, as Ted said, safety is our primary consideration. And when we think about the innovations that we're doing, I'll tell you that safety has been a big component of why we have put innovations into the mine. And I'll show you some specifically. But part of it is a drive to improve the safety of the company. There's something that the National Mining Association put together about 6 years ago called Core Safety. And for those of you that are not familiar with Core Safety, I would encourage you to go to coresafety.org. And if you go to that site, there's millions of dollars of intellectual property that has been made available by the mining industry that you can use. And we've used it. And we've used it with the objective of making our mines safer. We want 0 fatalities. We want to see our accident rate dropped in half from where it was 5 years ago. We're right on track to achieve that, and we want to go even beyond that. But that's been what the objective has been for the last five years. Now, I'm going to talk about innovation, and the context I'm going to talk about it in is in the context of a company that has been very focused on delivering value for shareholders for a long time, but I'm going to focus on the period of time that I've been at Hecla. So one of the things that's very interesting about the company is the culture of the company, I think, has allowed us to be successful over the last 15 years. And that's a culture that I think I largely came into and have been able to be a part of. But we've also had strategy, and I think the strategy has been successful, and most importantly because we've executed that strategy quite well. And if you look at our performance over that period of time, we've done really well, and we're now looking at, okay, how do we extend that performance? How do we give even more value to shareholders going forward? And we really do think that it's by putting technologies and new ways of improving productivity into the mines. And so this is a complicated description of what our strategy is, and I won't go into it in too much detail other than to say our focus is, the core of our strategy is really focusing on long-lived mines, and then with the idea of making them low cost. So when you think about our mines, one of the things you immediately come to the forefront is these mines are going to run for a long time. And we will, over time, drive costs down. There's all sorts of other elements to it, but that's the core of the strategy. When you have that, you have the ability to do the things that are at the top, grow your reserves and resources. I've mentioned that. Grow production. We actually increased production about 50% last year. Grow cash flow. We saw that increase about, EBITDA increase about $150 million. I told you I wasn't going to talk about any finance. I can't help myself. High return investments, capture the price cycles, and the real thing we're focused on in 2017 is improving productivity. And this is really a drive that Larry is leading, is how do we make the mines more productive? And we're doing it, the focus is on innovation. And this is a slide that we've adapted from the Canadian Mining Innovation Council that Mark Board had the company join. And it's modified because we're taking a different approach than many companies in the industry, in that we're not trying to make everything sort of perfect. We're just trying to make things better. We're just trying to take incremental steps to improving our operations. So we're fully connecting the mines. We're not 100% there, but we're a long way there at Greens Creek, and Casa and Lucky Friday will be following in short order. We're going to talk about how we're doing autonomous mucking that it's not quite continuous, but it's on that path to being continuous. We're certainly testing electric vehicles. We're testing ore sorting and underground. And so all of these things we're doing today, while this came out, January 2016, we think we're not necessarily ahead of the curve, but we're in many areas one of the companies that's as far along as any other company in the industry. So I'm going to talk about lots of these things, but the reason we're doing this is that I came in the industry 31 years ago. So in 1986, I didn't realize that the industry had changed dramatically, that we were at a tipping point. When I say the industry, I'm talking about precious metals industry. And what happened was in the late 70s, heap leach technology really took off. And that completely changed the gold mining industry, completely changed the precious metals industry. And we believe that we're at another tipping point. We think the industry is changing fundamentally because of the technologies that are available. And I don't know if it's just one technology or if it's all the technologies together, but our industry is changing, and if you don't change, you're going to get left behind. So those guys that didn't understand the heap leach technology and what it could do, they disappeared, and other companies developed those assets using those technologies. And I said our strategy is really to focus on long-lived, low-cost mines, and Greens Creek, it's been around for 30 years. We think it's got another at least 15 more years, 20 more years in front of it. Lucky Friday, this is actually the Lucky Friday 75th anniversary. And we believe this mine will operate clearly for another 25, 30 years, and even beyond that. Casa Berardi, been around in one form or another since the 80s. We think this mine will operate for another 20 years. San Sebastian doesn't quite fit into that mold. San Sebastian is a 1, 2, 3 year operation, but Dean and company are doing lots of exploration there, and we think that mine will ultimately become a long-lived mine. And if you have that long-lived mine and you have low enough cost, you have the margin and the capacity to try to innovate the mines. You have a rationale for doing it because it's going to be around long enough, and you have the opportunity to make those investments. So one of the first things that you have to do in doing this innovation is you got to start measuring things, and Larry is leading the charge on measuring how we operate. And this is just one example at Greens Creek, trying to gather the data to understand what we're doing and improve our performance, our productivity. And so one of the first things we did in this drive to innovate is we started to Wi-Fi Greens Creek, and we did it so that we would have proximity detection. We would know where employees are. So what this is a chart or an image that shows where people are. These are the people, that's their number, and where equipment is. So while we know where everybody is in the mine, and the machines know where the people are. So when they come close together, they talk to one another. And so the operator of that machine now knows, hey, I've got a person in my proximity. We need to be careful. Maybe I need to shut down. Maybe I need to get in contact with that person. But try to make the mine. That was the driver of why we wanted to Wi-Fi. But then you go from that, and we've now got ventilation on demand in part, and we'll have it fully functioning this year at Greens Creek, where when someone goes into a heading, the ventilation will be at what the right level is for them and the piece of equipment that they have in that heading. So there'll be a cost saving. So while the drive was for safety, we're going to get cost savings from that. And we've approached this whole innovation, I think, differently than most other companies, in that we've said getting a little bit is enough. And as we get a little bit of innovation, we'll look at how we can get more, and we'll learn from that. And one of the first things that we're looking at is how to take advantage of that time during the shift change that is that where nothing's happening in the mine. So if you think about a mine, 24 hours a day of potential operation, and you got a shift change that takes a couple hours twice a day, you got 4 hours where nothing's happening. Maybe there's a way to have something happen. And in fact, there is. I'm going to show you an automated LHD that's operating as we speak at Greens Creek. Well, I guess it's not the shift change, but today operated at Greens Creek that takes advantage of creating value during this time of the shift change. So this is a picture of the LHD. And so this man that you see right here, he's sitting at surface. And what he does is he will teach the LHD how to where to mine, where to dump the ore. And then after he teaches it once, he'll have it repeat that until the stope is mucked out. And so here's a image of that happening. So what you're looking at now is the camera. This is the view that operator at surface sees, and so it's going down the stope, and now you're going to see where he's sitting at surface, and this is what he sees. Now he has to teach that machine how to do it once, and then it repeats the process. Really, really cool stuff. But that's not all that we've done. At Greens Creek, we've been focused on improving recoveries. And over the course of the last 3 years, we've seen recoveries in silver go from about 70% to 78%. And we're now putting this Woodgrove flotation circuit, our cells in. It's going to cost us about $1.3 million, and our expectation is it's going to generate a return of more than 100%. We're at Greens Creek looking at jumbos, and we'll have these in by the benefits will happen next year. The jumbos where there's an aiming system that allows the drilling to be more efficient, to be deeper, and to be in the right places. So you get a cleaner break from these machines. The Lucky Friday, we made the investment on the foreshaft, and this foreshaft takes this mine to the 8,300 level. And what it does is you now have this infrastructure in place. You now have the ability to make, so this is a low return investment, but you now have the ability to make high return investments off the back of this. And at the Lucky Friday, we're looking at battery-powered equipment. So that's where we're testing battery-powered. This is, I guess, a 1.5-yard loader, and it's fully battery-operated. And here it is operating. You hear that electric whine to the thing? So as noisy as that is, that's a lot quieter than the diesel engines. Now, we don't know if this is where we'll ultimately go. We're testing it, but it has the opportunity to reduce the diesel particulates in the heading, make it, from a health standpoint, safer for the miner. Has the opportunity to, as a result, to also reduce the amount of ventilation that we need to do, so it could also lower the costs of operating. Pretty cool, huh? That's all battery. And we're looking at a continuous miner. And I failed to mention, we're going to have these booths. One of them is this 3D, and it's really quite cool. You put this on, and you go in, and you actually see what we're looking at constructing for a continuous miner. And we're doing this because we think this is a way to improve safety and the productivity of the Lucky Friday. And if this is successful, this is the sort of thing that could revolutionize the mines of the sort that we're mining, these narrow vein mines. This is at Casa Berardi. We've done a big increase in the throughput at the Casa Berardi because of the mill that we have on site. It had more capacity than what we're using from the underground, and we've done that by opening pits at surface. And so this provides flexibility within the mine. This makes it where there's less pressure on the underground to deliver feed, and makes it where you can have more time to more selectivity as to where you're working underground. And here's an image of the pits, and so in 1 year, or the pit, 1 year, the progress that we've made. And we think there's going to be a lot more pits at Casa Berardi. Casa is really is one of the leading lights. Casa, Greens Creek, in particular, these are both places where there's so much innovation that's happening from the mines themselves. So they've gone in and they've taken the hoist, and they've actually automated the hoist, and then they have the hoistman runs the rock breaker remotely. Interestingly, I was talking to this hoistman, and he said, I love the fact that I'm operating the rock breaker. It gives me the opportunity to stay fully engaged and sharp while, with just running the hoist, particularly when it's in the automated mode. He says the day becomes quite long because he doesn't have enough to do, basically. So I talked about what they were doing at Greens Creek with this aiming. Well, this is the stope. So we've actually are automating the stope, and it's allowing us to continue to operate during the shift change. They start a hole, and then the stope drill completes the hole when they do the shift change. And the aiming system, they're already doing that at CASA that I talked about at Greens Creek. And then this is kind of, not everything has to be high tech. This is kind of cool. What this is the material that's coming out. This is representing a crusher feed chute. And this is a test. And what you can see is really hard to get the material to go through that little chute. So what they did was they put this baffle, pretty cool innovation, low cost. It's made a huge difference right of lane at Casa Berardi. And this is a list that Elaine showed us yesterday at our board meeting, all the different projects that they're working on in innovating the mine. They've got continued work on their Wi-Fi system. They've got this mine operations center. So basically they're going to have a place where they know here's where the people are, here's where the equipment is, this is what the status is of everything. One place that all of this is happening. And they're automating the moving material on this the 985 automated drift. So this drift is only going to have automated equipment on it. It's a technology that's actually been around for about 10 years. And we've got the truck ordered, the first truck, and we'll end up having two. And you're going to have these two trucks go back and forth on this 1.5 km drive. We'll see cost savings there, and we'll see better operation, and we can buy less equipment to operate off that. Here's an image of it, and you'll have these chutes, the image of the level. You'll have these chutes that will automatically fill, and then you've got to have someone do the dumping. That will be remote but not autonomous. And we're doing ore sort testing. Dale Dean is going to, if you go over to the little next door when we have the displays, he'll show you what we're doing with ore sorting. This might be the thing that changes at least our part of the industry. And what this represents is as we reduce the amount of, as we sort the ore and we reduce the amount of tons, the grade goes up. And that's huge if you're not losing too much of the metal. And we're doing testing at San Sebastian, we're doing testing at Hosco, and we're seeing very good results. And so there's a huge opportunity to fundamentally change lots of properties because you can essentially raise the grade of the property. And we're doing things on the exploration side. Here's the Raman spectroscope. I hate that these words. But what this basically does is it's an opportunity to, with one shot of a mobile gun, look at the rock and determine what you would have had to do with fluid inclusions over the course of 6 months. You can do it in real time. And the geologists can now understand where this is from a fluid inclusion standpoint and change their exploration program on the fly. So the real focus for the next few years, I think, is going to be on continuing to improve our productivity and using innovation, using technology to do that. So with that, I will stop and answer the questions that folks have asked. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you, Tony. And Ted's gonna help me because there was one question that was asked that I think it's probably more appropriate for Ted to answer.
So start with that.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you. The question that was asked, how does Mr. Baker justify a one-year pay increase that would cover the cost of health insurance for 250 hourly employees the Lucky Friday? Will Baker's compensation continue to increase at this rate in 2017 and beyond? I will tell you that the Board of Directors is responsible for executive compensation, Mr. Baker's in particular, that we take that very seriously. We have spent a lot of time, along with our advisors, designing and maintaining and measuring compensation with the goal of making certain that Hecla can attract and retain the best people in the mining industry. So we expect to do that. The second thing I would say is that these compensation programs are highly adaptive to set goals and the company's performance. In other words, they have a significant amount of pay at risk. If the company doesn't perform, if it doesn't meet its productivity goals, if it doesn't meet its shareholder return goals, then their compensation will fall. So their compensation is going to be variable based on their improvements, the company's improvements, and the results. To give you a third view of that, this 2017, our competitive return, total shareholder return, when you look at a number of peers in the mining industry, was very good. We were toward the top of that and have been for the last several years, and that gets reflected in the compensation program. If we are competitive, we're having results. And the last thing I will say is that, as Michael just covered a minute ago, we actually have our shareholders vote in an advisory way on our compensation programs. And this year, that shareholder vote was strongly supportive of our compensation. So I and the board are very comfortable with our programs and with the results of that for our key executives.
Okay, thanks, Ted. Okay, I'll start with, there's a question from Bruce Barabee. And thanks so much for asking questions. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer and have a dialogue. So the question is, there are literally millions of dollars of equipment that are in storage that were bought and not used. Hoists, pumps, and loaders are part of the list. Are these examples of responsible spending of shareholder dollars? And I guess what I would say to that is a couple of things. I guess the first thing that I would say is, and it sort of ties in with, the innovation, right? We're gonna spend money, and we're gonna test things out, and we're gonna try and see if we can improve productivity, improve the way we operate. We're not afraid of making an error in spending on some things, and that's part, I think, of the culture of Hecla, where there has been that, the company has allowed that to happen, where on occasion you go, geez, that was not a very good expenditure. But you learn from it. And I'll give you an example. We built a shaft in Venezuela 2005, right? And that was a mistake, big mistake. And, we did not get a return on that investment. But when we came to build the shaft at the Lucky Friday, and in part it wasn't a good investment. You can sort of parse it lots of different ways, but the one in Venezuela, we went over budget, 4 times, I think. Does that sound about right? So when we built the foreshaft, we said, by God, we're not going to do that again. We've learned from that. We're going to make sure that we control the cost of the foreshaft. And so George took charge of that, and George, we came in very close to budget on that, within certainly 5% of the budget on that project, and that was the biggest capital project in the history of the company. So that's one thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is, and I'll use the service hoist at the Lucky Friday. Claire and I have talked about that over the years that he's been here. And the service hoist is something I think will add lots of value ultimately to the Lucky Friday, but it comes at a cost of putting that in that when prices were higher, we could afford to do it. Prices at the level they are now, we're not able to do it. So we've got that sitting to the side for another day to install that service hoist. So those are really some of the reasons why you end up having some things that you would like to see generate value and they don't. Okay, next question is from Paul and Lisa Sala. The Lucky Friday future depends on two shaft remaining operable for the next 20 or 30 years. It has been in terrible shape for years, and without it, the Lucky Friday can't operate. Are there plans to replace it in order to protect shareholder investment? I guess two things is we recognize the need to continue to invest in that two shaft to assure the Lucky Friday is functioning. And so we've been, I guess, Larry, for 3 years now, we've had a pretty steady crew on that two shaft to repair it. And it's going to be an ongoing process, and whether we ever are able to move away from that continuous repair, I don't know. This is a wood-lined shaft that was built in roughly 1960. So it's been around a long time. Do we have plans to do a new hole in the ground? The answer is no, but I don't tell this very often, but one of the things I want to do before I retire from Hecla is build a new hole in the ground. Now, I have no justification for that. No, there's no way to do it at this point. I think we need to have exploration success at the Lucky Friday, particularly laterally, not deeper. We need to find mineralization. So I'm hoping that when we get back underground and expand the exploration program, that we have success exploring to the west of the Silver Fault, or maybe there's success going to the east on like the 40 vein or the 120 vein or some of those other veins, or maybe it's something completely different from those things. But I'm hoping that at some point we're able to actually put a new shaft, or maybe it's a tunnel, right? There was a few years ago when we were contemplating the 4 shaft, there was a study done on a tunnel. It'd be a really long tunnel, and it's probably not viable, but boy, it sure is appealing to have a tunnel that's cutting across all of that ground and creating platforms for the exploration team. So that's sort of in my vision of what I hope could occur. This is from Lisa Sala. With the conventional mining drill blast muck at the Lucky Friday, ground stresses are relieved at blasting. The vast majority of rock bursts are with rounds, thus de-stressing the ground and improving safety. How do you plan to de-stress the ground with the continuous miner? How do you gain the trust of miners so they are confident they won't be in a catastrophic rock burst? Well, the first thing I'll say is I'm no expert, so I will allow you to talk to Mark Board, who is an expert on this, and I'm sure he can talk to you in a way. Lisa, you as an engineer, you guys can figure that out, or he can explain that to you. But the bottom line is, whatever mining systems we do at the Lucky Friday or at any of our operations, the number one concern is the safety of the employee. And everything we're doing when we think about all of this innovation is, how do we make it safer? In some respects, how do we remove the miner from the most hazardous place they can be? And generally speaking, that's going to be at the face of wherever they're working. So how can we remove them from the face so they're not subject to the risks? So whether it's the continuous miner or it's the automated LHD and automated bolting and jumbo, whatever it is, it's how do we get people away from the face? And that's really what's driving all that innovation that we're looking at. There's sort of a follow-on question that that Lisa has. Innovation and technology are excellent to introduce if it can be done in a tested and proven safe manner. There also needs to be economic advantage to implementation, is there? And I think you can see from the presentation, in some cases it's quite clear, the economic advantage. Some places it's a little murky. And we're working through what's going to generate a return, what's not. And in some cases, if it's just going to be safer, you don't worry about the return. You're going to make those investments. So the Wi-Fi at Greens Creek, there was no return that we could envision on that from the immediate implementing the Wi-Fi and the detection system. We did that anyway, even though there wasn't a return for it. And then the last question we have is from Rick Norman. And Rick, I have to tell you, over the last few months, I've gotten to read some of the stuff you've written. You're a great writer, very articulate, and appreciate that, and this is as well. Before Hecla's unfair labor practices instigated the current strike, members of 5114 worked for nearly 11 months in good faith under the terms and conditions of a previous agreement that expired in April 2016. During that time, production levels remained high. In Baker's, in my own words, the 3.6 million ounces of silver produced at the Lucky Friday were the most in 16 years. Production in the first months of 2017, prior to the labor dispute, was also impressive. So rather than provoking a labor dispute, why didn't Hecla continue to honor the status quo and negotiate again when the new mining system is proven to be safe, reliable, and productive? Well, realize that we had 27 meetings with the union. We had a federal mediator come in to try to get the parties to come together, and we were unsuccessful at doing that. And we continued to meet, and we continued to negotiate, and we never got to the point where there was a meeting of the minds. So eventually, after we gave our best offer, after we gave our last, best, and final offer, we reached impasse. And when you reach impasse, then things change. It was at that point that we implemented what we had proposed. And so that's short and sweet exactly where we ended up and why we had to do the implementation. We were at impasse, and then subsequently you guys, or maybe simultaneous with that, there was the strike. So that's the response to that. Now I think I've probably exceeded my time, so I'll hand the meeting back to Ted. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. At this time, I want to thank all of you for attending this morning, and thank you for your support and interest in Hecla. I would say the meeting is now officially terminated. However, as Phil mentioned, if you would, just outside the doors, you have refreshments there, and if you've got a few minutes, I would hope that you would stay and look at and view some of the technology Phil was talking about. They're going to quickly take this room and that room and set it up. It will be very quick, and then you'll be able to move through, and you'll also have a chance to talk with folks, the management and so forth. But thank you again for this morning, and please go out and enjoy some refreshments and stay to view the exhibits next door. Thank you.